Americans could feel the effects of World War II even 3 years before the war began. Before the fighting began, that is, because with the Lend-Lease Act and restrictions on trade, the war had already begun in a socio-economic sense. Despite the draft and rationing, the American public showed its support for World War II from start to finish. The American populace didn't want the war to go to war at that time, feeling like World War I just ended. As soon as the American government knew that war was inevitable, it quickly stepped up its pro-war propaganda, such as a war bond in Victory Garden advertisements, posters in particular. Some may say the war was not a good war, but in the end, Americans came together and successfully defeated fascism. The defeat of Japan and Germany spurred new wealth and prosperity in the United States of America, giving many Americans a job again, and pulled the American economy out of a depression. In that sense, it was a good war. War bonds were used by the U.S. to finance World War II. Roosevelt favored a voluntary system instead of the British system for heavy tax increases and forced savings. They cost between $1,875 and $1,000, and for people who couldn't afford that, the government even offered 10-cent stamps that could be saved up to buy a bond. Many celebrities pitched in to promote war bonds.
And Billy, this is for you. It's Mother's Christmas present.
War bond.
Yes, darling.
In total, $185 billion in war bonds were sold, enough to cover over half the cost of World War II.
Do you like standing in a queue for your vegetables, or do you think it's tiring and a waste of valuable time? Do you ever find your long wait has been useless, that supplies of what you want have run out before your turn comes? It's not the greengrocer's fault, it's up to you. Dig for victory. Have you joined the ranks of this great new army that's helping to win the war by helping themselves to good food?
For many Americans, the answer to that question was a resounding yes. This American phenomenon eventually produced 40% of the vegetables consumed in the U.S., with over 20 million Victory Gardens planted. Victory Gardens were planted everywhere, from apartment building rooftops in New York to the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, as well as in normal Midwestern backyards.
It's essential to culture, but there won't be any culture if our democracy is destroyed. Hundreds of students are now at Willow Run, and the sound of their riveting is like the sound of gunfire.
With over 12 million men in the armed forces by the end of the war, their jobs needed to be filled. At many places like Willow Creek.
But the goal of a liberator an hour can't be reached until at least 20% more are added to take the places of inducted men.
Rosie helped 6 million women step up to the task by convincing them that it was their duty to support their men and take these jobs. By the end of the war, 37% of women were employed in helping the war effort.
Working overtime on the riveting machine, when they gave her a production knee, she was as proud as a girl could be. There's something true about red, white, and blue about Rosie, the riveter.
By 1943, the Office of Civilian Defense had more than 11 million volunteers and only 75 paid staff positions. They helped prepare for air raids and organize rallies to help the war effort. For example, collecting aluminum pots and pans and distributing gas masks. They also organized blackout drills and learned how to treat bomb victims. People with special talents like firefighters were trained to do jobs that took advantage of that. However, the organization was disbanded after the war because there was little chance of the U.S. being attacked. Perhaps the most telling sign of American support for the war is the opinion polls done throughout the 1940s. During the war, Roosevelt's approval rating was consistently around 70%. Compare that to our previous president's approval rating of 25%. That is an unbelievably good rating. Another interesting poll is that throughout the war, about 50% of people believed that the government hadn't asked people to make enough sacrifices, when they were already paying much higher taxes and had their food and gasoline rationed. Clearly, they believed in what they were doing. With this information, it is obvious that the vast majority of the U.S. public supported the war.